Hello everyone, here it's HistoryLegends. So honestly, I didn't write a script for this. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm just gonna say what I think about the movie. I was disappointed. The end. Bye. No, for real. If you haven't watched the movie, there's gonna be a lot of spoilers, so you can either close the window or be spoiled. What bothered me is that everyone keeps saying how the movie is the best war movie, how it's so good. I'm sorry, it's not. For a budget with $90 million, I expected something better. Everybody keeps saying how the one shot is something technical, wow, it's so beautiful. Honestly, I don't even know if it actually brought something to the movie, so let's jump right in. First thing, the Lost Regiment. Just in the first minute, I knew something was gonna go wrong. It takes place on the 6th of April. 6th of April. Why this date, we don't know. Knowing that on the 9th, there was the big battle of Arras, but no, they decided to make this random regiment attack on their own 3 days before the big offensive. Doesn't really make sense, alright? Especially for World War I, where officers, generals had very limited means for initiative. This time the colonel just decided to attack because he believes the Germans are gone. First of all, what can you even do with 1,600 men? In this area, there was about 50,000 Germans. Can you even surprise 50,000 Germans with that little 1,600 men? Absolutely not. This scenario doesn't even make sense. And what bothered me is that the general seems very okay with the fact that one of his colonels just decided to transgress his authority and just attack. This is unacceptable. And the last fact is that they say that the Germans retreated to the Hindenburg Line. They actually did retreat to the Hindenburg Line after the Battle of Vimy Ridge, of Arras. When they saw that they couldn't hold the front line anymore, they just pulled back. But it wasn't a surprise to anyone. Everybody knew that. I mean, the British had hundreds of aircraft in the air, spying, looking at German movements. They knew what was going on. Now, the thing that bothered me is that they choose two random guys. Not so random in the fact that one guy has his brother in the Lost Regiment, but how does it help the overall mission? It doesn't. They just want to give it a similar vibe to Saving Private Ryan. Oh, you have to save the brother, and they want to make it an emotional story. But what bothered me is that they decided to choose these two guys for this dangerous mission. First of all, these two guys have no experience in trench raiding, infiltration missions. None. Schofield does have some medals and everything, but we don't even know why. And Blake just has his brother in the Lost Regiment. And to be honest, from a public relations point of view, if you have one guy's brother in the Lost Regiment, you don't want to lose the second brother while saving him. Now, the problem is they missed a beautiful opportunity to make something good of this story. First of all, if I was a general and I had 1,600 men in danger, I would send 200 men to save them. 200, maybe a battalion of 500, maybe 1,000 soldiers to save them. I mean, it's worth it. You have 1,600 guys of your guys in danger. Because if you only send two guys, what then? What if they get killed? It's so easy to get killed during the First World War. A random shell, an aircraft, a sniper, whatever. What if one of them gets wounded? You have to drag him all the way or abandon the mission? It's a big gamble. Overall, I mean, I would have understood if the general said, I'm gonna send 200 teams of two guys. But that's not the case here. He specifically said, I want these two guys. I don't know. And like I said, the movie missed the opportunity to make something big. For example, for the movie, they could have said, we gathered a platoon or squad, if they didn't have enough money, of specialized guys. For example, a squad of trench raiders, and you have machine gunners, a sniper, grenade specialist, night raiders, you know, a big team like that, and our two friends. That would have been very interesting to see how World War I was, and the fact that not everyone was a foot soldier, but they had specialties. And then you could have had an officer, something like that. I mean, the story could have been very interesting. Because you have to know one thing. For example, for trench raids, we always see in movies 2-3 guys sent, and usually frontline soldiers that don't want to go at night to get information about the enemy. But it wasn't really like that in reality. You had at the end, specialists, guys that were specialized in trench raiding. And there were not only 2-3 guys. Some trench raids were done by 100 and some even by 600 men to gather prisoners and information. And I'm saying this because the movie just takes 2 frontline soldiers for a mission that is not theirs. Now, I have to admit that the landscape at the beginning, when they crossed the no man's land, I loved it. The entire scene from the general's headquarters to the front line, I liked it. It was amazing. You see the daily life of the soldiers, how bored they were. That was well done, and how they cross over. And what happens is that they go to the most advanced trench. Usually it was not the best trench. It was not as well built as the others. And from there, they cross into the no man's land. Until that point, it makes sense. And visually, the no man's land that they depict is actually very realistic. Apart from the horse. I don't know why. In modern World War I movies, they always love to put dead horses in the no man's land, especially in 1917. It doesn't make sense to have a dead horse in 1917. The last time horses were used on the front line was 1914. I don't think the horse was there for 3 years, at least not in the state that is depicted. It's a small detail, but I really wanted to share it with you. The only thing about the landscape that's bothering me is that once they jump to German trenches, we don't really see the depth of the German trench network. They just go under the tunnel and that's it. There's one German line, one tunnel, and that's it. German trench systems were done in several layers. This is what often movies miss. There was the first line, second, third, and sometimes even fourth line of defense. That was a system, let's say 2-4 kilometers deep. Because in World War I, the problem was not for the attacker. It was not to capture the first line of defense. As we often see in movies, the first line always manages to repel the attackers. What really happened is that the attackers would capture the first line quite easily, but it was a mess. Soldiers were everywhere, officers were spread out, and generals or higher officers could not coordinate another attack on the second line. And this is when the defender would gather reinforcements, reserves, and counterattack. And this was done over and over. This is why casualties were so high. So, let's continue for the landscape. They crossed the big German area. What I don't understand why is that then they go into a field where there's no craters. It's peace. You see the farm, for example, it's the best example. First of all, there's no craters. There's not a single artillery shell that landed near that area. Maybe 2 kilometers from the front line. But no, this field has been spared from war. Nothing touched it. And a farm like that would have certainly been used by the Germans as a headquarters, so I don't understand why aircraft would not have noticed it, bombarded it, or anything. It's intact. So such a farm would have certainly been targeted by British artillery. Another problem I have is, where are the Germans? I mean, not long ago there were 50,000 Germans in this area and now they're all vanished. There's not a single sign that the Germans were even there in the first place. I mean, if you saw how many Germans retreated, you should see footsteps everywhere, truck tracks all over. You should see abandoned field hospitals, camps, artillery places. The entire area should be filled with food, abandoned depots, ammunition, abandoned artillery, not just one. It should cover the entire area. And the last thing is that it's too beautiful. It's early summer, and we can explain that because the movie was filmed in May and June. However, in April the weather was muddy and it was even snowy, so maybe make it cold, rainy. I understand because they filmed it in another month, but with modern technology, you could have added one feeling of rain and chaos. You could have added something rainy and muddy and really nasty to the environment. And then we have Schofield, the main character, that encounters a motorized column. And I have multiple problems with that. First of all, I mean, it's very conveniently placed in the story. But if we're talking history, it's impossible that trucks should be even there in the first place. So we have seen how destroyed the no man's land was, and now suddenly we have trucks in the area. How are they supposed to be there in the first place? trucks were not able to go through mud, and this is why we invented tanks, because tanks were actually able to go through the mud, but not trucks. And also, why are there such high-ranking officers in this column? There's maybe only 60 men, what seems to be a patrol, and you have one high-ranking officer in a car, and he's first in line. It's very dangerous. You could have a mine, he could be killed right away from an artillery strike, from a sniper, a machine gun nest. Why are they even there? We're given no context on what they're doing there. We're given no context on where they're going. The column has a mixed unit of Indian soldiers, more specifically Sikh soldiers, and British soldiers. Even though some people claim that it did happen, I'm sorry, the British Army did not mix units like that, especially not for units that were fighting on the front line. You see, the British used a local recruitment system, so a regiment from York would only recruit people from York, and they used the same system for troops from their colonies, so an Indian regiment would only have men coming from India. And some articles online say, oh, look at pictures of these Indian and British soldiers together, but honestly, a picture doesn't mean that they actually fought in the same unit. Maybe they were at the rear together, and the guy who took the picture said, okay, you guys go together, it's gonna make a nice picture. Doesn't mean they fought together in the same unit. The other thing that's problematic is the fact that Indian soldiers on the Western Front were only active from September 1914 to October 1915. After that, all Indian soldiers were sent to other front lines, such as East Africa or mainly the Middle East. After that, only 2 Indian cavalry divisions were left in France. So to see Indian soldiers like that doesn't even make sense from a historical point of view. And that doesn't mean that Indian soldiers did not participate in World War I. But in that area of the war in France, they should not be there. Alright, now in the story, the main character shakes the officer's hand and tries to cross the bridge. There's one problem. The German sniper was there the entire time. He saw how the officers were there. He saw multiple officers in plain sight and did not even attempt to fire at them. The movie could have been so much better if the sniper actually shot one of the officers and it created chaos. No, the sniper waits for the entire column to go away and misses every shot at a lonely guy walking on a bridge just a few meters away. It's a typical thing about how German soldiers are so bad, but if the Germans were so bad, why did the war last so long? Because it's not the only time the Germans are bad at aiming in the movie. And the Germans in that village, we don't know who they are, we don't know what they're doing there. Clearly it's not an organized unit. Some guys are drunk, some guys are running hectically through the city. Again, it would have been more interesting if we saw that it was a German camp and there were hundreds of German soldiers. And what are they doing there? I mean, are they stragglers? Were they left behind by their friends? What are they doing there? We're given no context at this German unit. So fast forward a bit. Now he rushes through the entire village, gets in the water, and finally encounters the Devonshire Regiment. Now, I'm very curious how the paper with the order from the general did not get wet at all. Nobody explains that. The guy is entirely wet and just pulls out his paper, like shining paper. But what bothered me even more is that the guy is wet. He has no helmet, nothing saying he's actually British. So he finds this group of British soldiers that are praying or singing, I don't know, and nobody bats an eye. For all we know, he could be a German spy. There's not a single sentry defending the area. I mean, the colonel knows he's in the middle of enemy territory and there's not even a single guy to protect the surrounding areas. But let's go now to the final point, the final attack. There's so much to talk about, honestly, but I'll try to be as brief as possible. So we learn that these men dug the trenches the previous night. Are you telling me that the Germans did not notice anything of this? Again, look at the landscape. There's not a single artillery shell. The Germans just let these guys dig in without even firing at them. So let's backtrack a bit. You have 1,600 men coming out from a wood, and they're just trying to build trenches, and the Germans are just watching. They're not even trying to kill them, they're just watching them. And we can't forget that April 1917 is actually called Bloody April for a reason. The Germans controlled the sky. They inflicted huge casualties to the British. If I remember, the Germans lost 66 aircraft, but inflicted 245 casualties to the British. You cannot tell me that not a single German aircraft noticed that 1,600 men were just standing there. It's impossible. Now the main scene where the main character Schofield runs across the trenches to get to the colonel is pretty good. I like it. And what's funny is that the second wave attack just starts, and only then do the Germans decide to bombard the British. Funny, right? As if they knew the exact timing of the British attack. And when you see the British soldiers attack, what's bothering me is that, again, it's the stereotypical way of World War I. So you have one officer, he whistles, and you have hundreds of men going out of the trenches. But there's no organization, there's no units. You see, you had a captain, and the captain had multiple lieutenants who had sergeants. It was not a mass of soldiers, it was organized units. Then they just jump up and charge forward, as if they were 200 years back during a Napoleonic charge. All we remember about World War I is bayonets. The soldiers have rifles and put bayonets and charge forward. But in reality, especially in 1917, the soldiers attacked with a creeping barrage if possible. The soldiers attacked in multiple jumps. So the soldiers would run forward, get cover, run forward, get cover, and they would do that until they reached enemy lines. You know, in reality, the soldiers did not want to get killed, so they wouldn't just run carelessly through the enemy field. But if we notice something, when the second wave attacks, the field is pretty clean. I mean, there's not a single sign that the first wave failed. There's no artillery fire, so no craters, and there's no killed or wounded in the field. So from my understanding, the first wave actually managed to cross the entire no man's land pretty smoothly and capture the German defenses. So I don't know why they're trying to stop the second wave. The attack actually succeeded. And again, it's very funny to see the guys running in 1917, bayonets in front. You should see guys throwing grenades. You should see guys running with machine guns. You should see officers. These guys spent 3 years perfectioning the art of assaulting trenches, and here you see them just charging forward. It was supposed to be my last point, but I remember one thing. At the farm, again, that farm, there was a dogfight between one German aircraft and one British aircraft. But even that's not realistic. In April 1917, Bloody April, the Germans used something new called squadrons. So they would fly with about 10, 11 aircraft. So the actual thing that would happen is that the British pilot would be alone facing 11 German pilots. And this is how the Germans ranked up so many kills, because they would have an overwhelming numerical advantage. Now I almost lost my voice, but I'm gonna try to fix the movie. I thought of a recommendation on how the movie could have been better. So I will take their flawed scenario. I'm just gonna add one thing to the story that would have made it perhaps one of the best war movies ever done. So Blake dies and Schofield is left alone at the farm, but then he encounters a patrol of Sikh soldiers, a company, about 120 men. And he speaks with the officer because most other soldiers didn't speak English pretty well. So he speaks with the main officer and discovers that the general actually sent a lot of teams like Blake and Schofield to get to the lost regiment. And he feels like a pawn in the big game. He felt unimportant. But nonetheless, he decides to finish his mission and goes with the Sikh soldiers. Eventually they reach the bridge. They suffer from sniper fire but manage to get through it pretty easily. Then the Sikh soldiers set up in the village, and because it's gonna get night, they want to know where the lost regiment is, and suddenly they get attacked. The Germans that were supposed to trap the Devonshire regiment actually fall on this Indian company. And now you see flares in the night, you see the Germans attacking, you see grenades, you only hear machine gun, the battle is violent. And now you have Sheffield with the Sikh captain in the house and a dozen men, and they don't know what's going on, the battle is raging. Suddenly, the Sikh captain gets hit, he's wounded, and Sheffield faces a difficult choice. Either he helps the captain and fights in the village, or decides to finish his mission on his own. And filled with shame, he decides to abandon the captain and runs away. As he runs away, you see dead Sikh soldiers, you see dead German soldiers, you see how the battle is violent. He dodges the bullets, explosions, and he runs and gets to the forest. And there he meets a patrol of the Devonshire regiment, where he tells them that he has a message for the colonel. Alright, hope you enjoyed this review. It's my first time doing this type of review. If you liked it, comment below. Tell me if there's other movies you want me to review. Tell me if you agree or disagree with the points I made. And if you have other points where it's not realistic, please comment below. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram and on TikTok.